Hello and welcome to episode 158. It's a pleasure today to be joined by Javier Zamora. And a little bit about Javier. He was born in La Herradura, El Salvador in 1990. At the age of 9, he migrated to the United States to be reunited with his parents. Zamora holds a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, where he studied and taught in June Jordan's Poetry for the People. I've heard great things about that. And an MFA from New York University. He is the recipient of scholarships to Bread Loaf, Frost Place, Napa Valley, Squaw Valley, and VONA Writers Conferences, and fellowships from CantoMundo and Colgate University, where he is the Olive B. O'Connor Fellow. His poems also appear in Best New Poets 2013, Indiana Review, Narrative, Ploughshares, Poet Lore, Theater Under My Skin, which is Kalina Press in El Salvador, and elsewhere. He's had his work recognized with a Meridian Editor's Prize, Consequence Poetry Prize, and the Organic Weapon Arts Chapbook Contest. He enjoys hiking, camping, and is just getting into backpacking. And of course, 2022 Solito, which will be the main focus of our discussion, as well as Unaccompanied, which was that a chapbook or a poetry collection, or how would you?
Poetry collection.
Poetry collection.
Yeah.
You know, also very well awarded as well. Good afternoon. Welcome. How are you today?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm doing great. Thank you. Let's keep it real. Does the Salvadoran Spanish have the best groseria?
I think so.
Yeah.
We cut everything down and make it sound beautiful.
So cut everything right, and also a lot of compounds. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah.
hija de la, is it hijo de la?
Hijo. And then you don't have to say the E, you say hue.
And then it's gonna be what,
So
like
little things like that. Yeah.
Okay, man. I'm not gonna say the rest of that cuss word, but man, there's some great ones. Great ones. Like we were talking about before we started recording. I appreciate always learning more Spanish for sure, and so seamlessly that you did it in the book. I mean, you used I guess you'd say Spanglish, but even when there's a question that you have in English, you have like the upside down exclamation point or question mark. I guess start off with that. What was your thinking on translating, not translating, italics, and yeah, I mean, even using like vos, which I think is only mainly used in Central America.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what was your thinking on that? Was it like, hey, full speed ahead, if people don't get it, they don't get it, or how did that go for you?
First, like voceo is mostly used in Honduras, some parts of Guatemala and El Salvador, but also predominantly in Argentina.
Okay.
Which is why I lost my voice, because I rooted for Messi on Sunday.
Okay.
Today is Tuesday, so I'm not sick. It's just me screaming for Messi. Anyways, yeah, growing up after I immigrated, I grew up in California, and I talk a lot about assimilation to the English speaking world that is the United States. But also, if you're an immigrant, especially in California, in the Bay Area at the time, you also have to assimilate to the dominant Spanish speaking world there. And for us Central Americans, it is a very Mexican heavy, Mexican centric world. And even being in school in the early 2000s, and then in like the aughts, and then even into the 2010s, there were questions of like representation, and usually the Spanish, even in most of the movies that we still watch in 2022, tends to be very Mexican centric. And during that time, Salvadorans have become the second biggest immigration group in the United States. We just surpassed Puerto Ricans.
Wow.
And it makes a huge difference, because I don't remember seeing myself in a book, because even the Spanish was different. And I think it's about time that us Central Americans and us from XYZ country in the world, that we just really heighten our eccentricities, our differences. And that the more particular you get, the more universal it also becomes, because it tends to be more, I don't know, more true, more honest. And that's what I was going for. with all of those decisions that you talked about.
Right. Oh, I appreciate that. As a Spanish speaker, I'm a Spanish teacher. I'm embarrassed to say this, but like, what do you call the upside down exclamation point? Does it have a name?
I don't know.
No, right?
I actually don't know. It's
Okay.
just
Okay.
it's just a question.
It's just what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, that's also what I hated about reading out loud. I came here in fourth grade learning English. The teacher asked you to speak out loud.
Sure.
And my decision to include the upside down exclamation or question mark is that in Spanish, if you're reading out loud, that you're entering a question. But in English, you don't. You get
Okay.
surprised by the end. I was like, oh, I read that wrong. That
Oh,
should have
yeah.
been a
Yep.
question. And I hate
Oh,
being
yeah, that makes
tricked.
a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And that works very well, just like everything else in the book. So I would, again, congratulations on all the awards. Jenna Bush, right, is the book club, and you were on to Today's Show, featured there. And it's just, I mean, work of art is the word. It really is just a masterpiece.
Thank you.
So, I'm sure there are many, many more words to go. I know, and it definitely comes through in that final, in your letter from 2021 that ends the book.
Mm-hmm.
I know you didn't do it for the awards, but how does it feel like to get these awards and to be featured? Is it like, do you feel like you're carrying others on your back in a positive way, negative? I mean, a positive way,
yeah.
Sorry, I was also going to say, is there sort of like, maybe guilt's not the word, but for people who didn't have the chance that you did, or the Marcellos who maybe made his own choices, those type of people. Like, I guess, how does it feel? Like, what do you feel like on your shoulders? Who do you feel is on your shoulders, if anyone?
Well, I couldn't talk about the things in this book that happened to me when I was 9. I didn't begin to really look at them until I was 29. Even though I have a book of poems that came out when I was 27.
Yeah.
To put it this way, I only talk about Chino, I think, in 3 pages out of the 88 pages of poetry.
Okay.
I rarely talk about what happened to me in Guatemala and what happened to me in Mexico. If you look at my poetry book, there's a huge silence that I needed to get off my chest. And for 20 years, everything that you mentioned, I carried very heavy. I think entering the poetry world, I felt like I needed to do this for Central Americans. I needed to do this for Salvadorans. I needed to do this meaning just existing and just writing. And I felt so much pressure. And it was that pressure that really put me in a very dark path. And we're talking about when I still didn't have a green card during the Trump administration. So there were a lot of things happening externally and internally. Finally, 29, I find myself with the privilege of having a green card, the privilege of having a big enough paycheck that I can afford therapy. And I find also the time to write. And all of those things led me to really just do this for myself. This is really a advertisement of the power of therapy.
Yes.
And I like that it's turned into that, because I find myself talking about therapy every interview or everything, because it really did. If you really think about it, my job during the writing of this book, which took me 3 years, was not to be a writer. My job was to heal. Like, I would think about one of the biggest traumas of my life, which is not the only one, but the one that has really shaped me as a little kid. I was getting paid to think about this 24/7. And I mean 24/7 because once you're ready to go there, I was trying everything, even my subconscious. I would dream and be back in some of the settings that I describe in the book. everything in my body. I would wake up with aches. I was there, which is also a privilege even of itself. And to the point that if you are doing this, and I'm only talking about my personal journey.
Sure.
When my poetry book came out, it was like I was replicating the journey. I was rarely home. I was drinking too much. I was not happy. By the time that Solito comes out, which is actually more personal than my first book of poems, I'm fine. Everything is just extra. I didn't think of the awards. I didn't think of the pressure that it is for me to be now like perhaps the first Salvadoran to be in the New York Times bestseller list. That's just icing on the cake. And when you don't think of those things in the writing of it, and I have to be honest, I did want the awards when I was writing my book of poems.
Sure.
And for this one, I just wanted to fucking heal. I wanted to be happy, to really not have that weight in the back of my shoulders, that everything is just like unreal. I don't think everything has really, no, I haven't had the time to truly process what it means to be who I am now.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I mean, obviously, I know it's personal and like confidentiality and such, like, so you can say little or all or whatever. But like with a therapist, like, you know, how can you find a therapist who knows were you able to find someone who knows your experience, who lived it? Or was it more just like a good therapist is a good therapist?
Both. And it's also up to you, the individual. You know, I've been forced to be in therapy as early as 7th grade. Sure. Because I was a academically great student, but I had behavioral problems. And I want to say I've had close to 10 therapists in my life. All of them except for 2 have been white. So only 2 of them were non-white. One of them was Salvadoran, but in hindsight, I don't think that mattered. I think what mattered most is the person that I have now. She is a child immigrant herself, who came here when she was 5, and she's from the DR, from a very similar socioeconomic background as mine, which means poor. And I think because of that and how transparent she is as a therapist, like for me to know that, other therapists wouldn't share that information. But the transparency, her honesty, and her background really allowed me from the very first meeting and the second meeting onwards to really trust her with the information that I was going to pour onto our lab. So I think all of those factors have been indicative for me to really grow this time. My 10th try at poetry.
Hey, I appreciate you sharing that. Keep coming back to the shoulders metaphor, but kind of like, you know, on whose shoulders are you standing? Like I was blessed to be able to speak with like fellow Salvadoran American from the Bay, is Roberto Lovato. His Unforgetting is mind blowing.
Yeah.
You know, who are some of the writers, you know, in your very young days up to now, who really have inspired and challenged you?
Thank you for mentioning Roberto Lovato. You know, my Instagram handle is JZ Salvi Poet. I remember being a undergrad with this organization that no longer exists called USEO, with Salvadoran University students. And he spoke at the retreat, I want to say in 2011. And he meaning Roberto Lovato, gave this presentation about being like, we as Salvadorans still don't know what to call ourselves. So even us, we say, are we El Salvadoran? Are we Salvadorian with an I? Are we Salvadoran with an E? Do we just cut the I and the E? Are we just Salvadoran? Or, you know, and this is a question of identity. And so he was suggesting just Salvi. And that was the first time that I heard Salvi.
Wow.
So as from an identity point of view, Roberto has done so much for all of us. Salvadorans born here or immigrants who came here.
Yeah.
Around the same time, I didn't major in English or creative writing. I'm a history major.
Okay.
But I did take these classes in poetry for the people. So I must say, June Jordan. My foundations are with her work, and also Roque Dalton, who back as early as 2008, if you Googled Salvadoran or El Salvadorian poet, Roque Dalton would come up, and he still does. And he's like our Shakespeare, or every nation has their person, and for us is Roque Dalton. So those two, from more contemporary, would be Sharon Old and Yusef Komunyaka, just from their confessional aspect, and that was like the early foundations.
No, Solito's not confessional at all, right? Not at all. Not at all. Well, yeah. So usually I ask about growing up and relationships with language, and yeah, I mean, there's something still to ask you about that. But obviously, a lot of your childhood is in the book itself, is in Solito. But so you, I mean, it was all downhill from there, right? In second grade, you met the president?
Yeah, the Salvadoran president. Yeah.
Yeah. So
who I can curse in this, right?
Yeah, of course.
Who was a piece of shit.
Okay.
It's weird that I like shook his hand, but yeah.
Did you know that at the time, or you were just a kid?
No, no, just a kid. Like, oh my God, you are perhaps the first white person that I meet, and you're the Salvadoran president.
Huh.
Yeah.
At the age of 7 or 8, huh?
Yeah.
Are you a Simpsons fan at all?
Yeah. I've only seen it in Spanish. It lost so much. I've never seen it in English.
Yeah.
I was a hardcore fan when I was in El Salvador.
There's Homero, right? What is Bart? Is Bart
Homero.
Bartolo, or is he just Bart in Spanish?
Bart.
Okay, Bart. Yeah. But there's a thing where like Bart he goes out with his friends or whatever for the summer, or just like, and he like claims he's at a grammar rodeo, and like he somehow convinces his parents that that's a real thing. But a grammar contest is a real thing, though, huh?
It's a real thing, yeah.
Do you have like a trophy still or anything like that?
I do still have the medals, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sounds like your grandfather came from like a military background, like police possibly, right? Did you have, what kind of foundation did you have for the written word? I mean, were there magazines and books all over the houses where you grew up? Like, what was your relationship with the written word?
And I'm gonna drag my grandpa right now. Well, no. Okay. So my grandpa to this day goes to the market and gets the newspaper and reads it for like an hour.
Yeah.
And he reads it front to back. So he's always been a great reader. And he encouraged my mom to also go to school and go that route. So there's on that side of the family. On the other side, my dad he fled the country because he was a devout leftist. And if you're a leftist, I think you have to not only read, but also question. And it's the questioning that my dad taught me. And this is something that I don't think I've said in any other interview, but when I got to this country, my mom, very first day, I had just crossed the border, June 11th. She was like, here are the books, and you have to learn 10 English words a day. And from June until August, I had to learn 10 words each day, which worked. On the other hand, my dad had a copy of A Death Foretold by Garcia Marquez, which is advanced reading. Sure. I was 9, and my dad's here, take this book in English, and here is the book in Spanish, and try to read it. And I didn't complete the book. And he's like, here's this dictionary. If you don't know what a word means, look it up. And I didn't finish the book. That was when I was in fourth grade. I didn't finish it until seventh grade, and it's like 100 pages. So this is words were always around. And this is, I have told this story, but because my mom made me, both of them made me not only learn but memorize new words. I started school in August. By November or late October, in fourth grade, all of fourth grade had a spelling bee. And I had just graduated ELL class. And guess who won the fourth grade spelling bee?
Yeah.
I did. and that's my
the
parents.
winning word?
Galleon.
Galleon?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, shoot, 2 L's, right?
Yep.
Oh, man.
Yep.
Dang.
And I remember I knew it because in this version of the dictionary, I think it's in Oxford or I don't know, but it has a jaguar in the front, and it's like blue, white, and blue with a jaguar in the middle. And if you look up galleon, it actually has a picture of a galleon, which is just like a little boat, which is how I remembered how to spell it.
Okay, whatever works, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So as you got into like high school and college, I mean, you said you were a history major. Were you like in the school paper? Were you like writing poems just on your own? Like, where did the writing part come in?
Later, I did not want to be a writer. I did not even want to read books. I think it's fair for me to say that I would Spark Notes books. I was your
I am shocked. Absolutely shocked.
I really wanted to be an engineer, and then calculus hit, and I did not understand it. And so,
yeah.
And so around 17, a poet came in and taught, I think, Pablo Neruda. And from then on, she gave us an assignment, and the assignment was tell us about your home, where you're from. And I hadn't really thought about El Salvador. Meanwhile, I'm in this deep talking about assimilation phase, where at points I refuse to even speak to accept that I speak Spanish. I would just I don't understand. I don't speak Spanish. So I was in that phase when this prompt came in, and it just unlocked everything. And I had just also read Motorcycle Diaries, which it's a memoir. It's a travel memoir.
So much better than a movie, right?
Yeah, that I think Solito is a travel memoir. So I think that was like the first time that I was like, oh shit, you can just talk about a road trip that you took in your life.
Yeah,
I can do that. I've done that.
Yeah. I wonder how like the Bay Area shaped you. I mean, Oakland, Berkeley, like there's a history of protest and activism and progressivism, Black Panthers, and I wonder how the Bay Area affected you.
I think I got that prompt. I was reading Che Guevara, and after you read Che Guevara, it's rare if you don't become a super Che Guevara fan. Even, I let my hair grow. I would wear Che Guevara t-shirts. And then my dad began to tell me about his leftist leanings, and being in the Bay Area, there's a protest all the time. I think the first protest I went to was the Darfur protest.
Oh yeah.
I think back in 06.
Looking back at me, can you see that green poster?
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I was there at the Embarcadero, and I just remember being like, oh shit, like people come out for a cause. That's fucking dope. And then my dad began to tell me about like the times that he would go and protest in El Salvador, like what it was like growing up in a war. And from then on, I was like, oh wow, I don't know any of that history. Why don't I shift gears, since I can't do calc anymore? I want to be a historian. And at that time in 07, in my country, El Salvador, history wasn't a subject that you could major in at any university in my country. That changed in 2011. But I think just knowing that fact, I sincerely wanted to go to Berkeley, major in history, and then say fuck it to the United States because I was still undocumented and go back to El Salvador and teach history.
Oh, wow.
The national, that was my teenage dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not too old for that.
Right? Yeah.
Oh man, well, yeah. I mean, I know Roberto Lovato in Unforgetting talks about that idea of like, if you're not teaching history, like, I mean, it's trite, but like, the idea of you're gonna recreate the mistakes of the past and all that. So it was literally against the law, huh?
Yeah.
Oh man. Were you're probably a little young for it, but like, did you get any Rage Against the Machine in those days?
I didn't. I was more on the other side of Immortal Technique,
Oh, okay.
like the
Yeah.
rap protest side
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
Not the rock. The rock came
Right.
later. Yeah.
Well, hey, Zach's one of the best MCs. But anyway, no, but like, yeah, I don't know extreme and a lot about Immortal Technique, but I feel like he's up there with like Rage and like System of a Down, where like every song, like there's no songs about love, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no songs about the cute girl and who lives down the street. Like they're hardcore, like imperialism and Che Guevara
Fucking
and
yeah.
Rage Against the Machine. They had their liner notes were like recommended readings.
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky and Frantz Fanon. And anyways, oh man. Well, I would love to get into Solito, which even just starting off with the title, like, why not solo? Is Solito, is it that the Ito, the kid, the little one?
Yeah. You don't. I don't know. Maybe it's a salviness, but you don't say, oh, I don't. You say, oh, estoy solito. No, nobody's here with me. Oh,
Okay.
¿estás solo? Sí, estoy solito.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's more of like the word. It's just, to me, I see it as three aspects. Um, Before I take the trip, my dad had already left. I grew up without a dad. In the sense that he still communicated with me, but I don't remember being in the world where I remember what he smelled like, or. And then my mom leaves when I'm 5, so then I'm solito in the sense that my parents aren't there. And then during the trip, the 9 weeks, first I'm with my grandpa, and then he leaves, and there's nobody that I know that's with me. So I am by myself. But then these strangers, particularly Patricia, Carla, and Chino, they go from strangers to being the family that helped me survive during those 7 weeks in which I was truly without anybody that I knew. But then they leave. And that's the third aspect of the only people that could attest to everything that I talk about. And the only 3 that were with me from the beginning in El Salvador, they also leave. Right. And so there's like the before the trip, the during the trip, and after the trip. And I think it's the after that really got to me. So this title becomes internalized. And so this 9-year-old kid in the Bay Area grows up feeling that there's literally nobody that can understand what he has just survived. And the only 3 people that can, he has also lost contact with. And what does that do to a kid growing up in a rich county, but in the poor side of town with all the brown people, during a time when being undocumented wasn't a thing that you could share with people or a thing that was okay? That really fucks with you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, like you said, they were the only 3 people who could understand. And as much as you can, you make the reader's sympathy become empathy, but it's not 100% possible. We didn't go through the trip with you, but the way you describe it is just, like an artist. But you can't help but think about, especially in recent years with like Central American, the migrants, right? Especially younger people. Do you feel like your individual, your solo story is like indicative of so many other stories? Have you been able to talk to more recent arrivals? Like, I mean, I feel like it's impossible to read this book and not feel for those who are making this ultimate journey.
In a way, I was forced to write this book because during the height of the child unaccompanied minors at the border, which was into 16 to 17.
Okay.
And that was when I saved the height, not by numbers, because now there are more, but from a media perspective. When your first book of poems hasn't even come out, and you feel like you are sharing a secret, and then that secret is on every TV screen, on every newspaper, all these horrific pictures are just like on blast. It really fucked with my head. It really traumatized me. And then not only that, during that time, most of the coverage was being done by non-immigrants themselves.
Right.
A lot of books have come out, not from immigrants themselves.
Wait a minute, you're not talking about initials JC, are you? No.
I don't even want to give it that time of year, but that wasn't the only one. There were so many. And so it seemed that everybody wanted to make a quick buck out of a story that they did not truly understand. I'm a survivor.
Sure.
All these people are survivors. A lot of these pictures being taken by the New York Times, those people don't have, I doubt that they have asked for the permission for that horrific picture to be shared everywhere. And that also really fucked with me. And so that's what the other aspect of this, there's the healing aspect of it, but then externally, all this shit was going on. And then we have a president who completely hates me, me being represented in all these people. And it was just like the last straw. And all these external things put me in a spiral. And luckily, in that spiral, I was able, through therapy, to shift the narrative and to hopefully paint a truer picture, because I hope that in Solito, the reader doesn't only look at the negative. Because yes, even if you are ever in a life or death situation, you would know that if you don't create hope, a lot of times, not always, but you're not going to make it. And as a little kid, I think my little 9-year-old brain understood that. And the people around me, the adults, Chino, Patricia, and Carla, also understood that. And because if you just focus on the negative, like a lot of these journalists and a lot of these narratives tend to do, which is why they're not true accounts, you don't make it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, yeah, I mean, it sounded like it started off as a joke, right? The little family that you guys heard some of the gringos say okay, and you started to say okay with a laugh, but like you said, you were pumping yourselves up. It was we have to, right?
Yeah.